Hello everybody. A couple of weeks ago, I was lucky enough to be able to sit down with Steve and discuss his most recent design, this thing here, Mccor. Now, Steve, someone who would require no introduction in the New Element community, might need a little bit of introduction for you guys. Steve is incredibly old. He has been a member of the community, a valued member of this community for a super long time. We're talking 20 plus years. And Steve recently showed us all how it's done, put us all to shame. The requirement for getting a green name, which is the one that I have, is 80%. The requirement for red name, which is what Steve has, is 85%. And Steve, of course, being an overachiever, got 92% on this design. It is very difficult to articulate how challenging it is to get even 85%. Getting 92% is insane. So I thought it would be a really great idea to sit down with Steve and discuss a little bit about his methodology when building Mccor. But the thing that really made me want to speak with Steve was the write-up that he gave. The link to this is going to be in the description. And Steve gave a little, very brief write-up here about the process he went through in bringing this park to life, and specifically, to my interest, the macro. So those big decisions that influence all of the smaller decisions that come afterwards. I talk about it all the time in the Fundamental Forest series. So I was really eager to sit down with Steve about this thing in particular. So without further ado, the links for all this is in the description. I very much recommend you check out the park. You don't need to read anything in here to understand what we're talking about. It is not a requirement at all, but I do heavily encourage you to do so because it is a really interesting read and it might give you that extra little layer of interest in the conversation. So with that being said, let's hop into it. I hope you enjoy. We've got Steve here. How are you doing, Steve?
Hey, I'm doing well, Sam. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah. I'm glad to have got you here today to discuss a little bit about your new release, Mccor. Hopefully it's not your last one. Has the doctor given you a verdict on your, you in good health?
Yeah, I'm still going to be with us for this foreseeable future, I hope.
Well, I don't know about that, but maybe we can get another park out before the inevitable happens.
I got some things cooking.
Oh, good. There's already a sequel on the way.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I'm certainly glad to hear that after looking at this park. And one of the things that you sort of went into when you were giving your post-mortem on the project was some of the macro elements. So I wanted to come on and pick your brains about that. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Excellent. So you've covered a lot of this in your roundup, which I very much recommend people. It will be linked in the description. I very much recommend people go and have a look at that because it is very interesting. Just for the illiterate amongst us, could you give us a synopsis of what you were trying to get into there? Then we can go into a bit more specifics.
Right. The comment that I made about the park kind of after it was released and everybody said their piece on it was kind of to give my perspective, my discipline on how I go about laying things out within my maps. So I'm certainly happy to get into detail about where things I think would need to go and how to lay them all out, particularly with a sight line for a guest in a park.
Excellent. And what would you say, is there something that begins is it the first thing when you're putting pen to paper? Is that the first thing you are sketching out, or what would the order sort of go in for you?
Well, since we're looking at this map here, I'll kind of use it as the example. What I would typically do is the coaster is kind of the focus, right? That should always be kind of the primary focus for any park, any design. So I tried to find a good spot for that And I think I mentioned it even in my my post-mortem, as you mentioned it, was that it kind of lends itself to being in a corner. It's an L shape. It kind of suits an overall park and being kind of in a corner. So I thought I'll stick it in this overall imaginary park that I've conceived here in like the back right corner of it. So that way, from there, everything could sort of hopefully fall into place. You know, it's not an exact science, so I had to play around a little bit with the positioning of certain things, but I found that to be a pretty good spot. And then from there, I really wanted to see, well, then what does the guest in the park need to be led to? And I thought I would take the idea of Disney's their new area that they're building in Animal Kingdom in Florida, this concept art floating around, and I kind of use that as a basis where there's a temple that they're using in one of their attractions. I thought that could be the station, and if that was going to be kind of the station, there's going to be stairs, and stairs for a temple are kind of like the focal point of a temple. So I thought that could be a nice kind of weenie. I think you even mentioned that in one of your videos recently, right?
Yeah, just the way that weenies work, basically a focal point that peeps are going to be drawn towards, perhaps even subconsciously. If a object that they can see on a skyline is naturally going to affect how they navigate.
Right. So if I thought the stairs could kind of service that, put that kind of towards the back. If you kind of look at the pathways from the stairs all the way to the very edge of the map, it really is just a straight line. Yeah, there's kind of some like offshoots and like a table seating area or like a curve here or there, but really on a grid to grid perspective in RCT, it really is just a straightaway. So I wanted the guest from the very edge of the map to that stairway of the temple be able to kind of see that. And then from there, seeing how it can maybe kind of triangulate other sight lines. Like if you remove the scenery, you might see some of the grids that I've used. You see like the yellow and the green. Yeah, so I'm just trying to lay out based on like where the guests were going to enter the map, what they would be seeing if they kept walking straight. So the yellow, you're walking straight from there, you'll see probably the carousel with the cobra roll kind of looming in the background. If you continue in the other direction to the right, past kind of the main street, at the very, very end of that pathway, you have the dark ride facade there. So I tried to make it so that no matter which weenie, which focal point you were kind of sitting at as a guest, what were you going to be looking at? What were you going to be drawn towards? So it is kind of a bit of a triangle shape, but I tried to make sure that everything was going to be leading the guest somewhere, in some way.
Excellent. That's a fascinating basis from which to move. So would you say that this station really led, along with the coaster, obviously, you put the coaster down, you conceptualize where it would sit. So a little bit further context, this layout will be very familiar to the people who've watched my judging video. It is from a competition that we had over at New Element, the New Element Design Contest. It is a layout that was made by Pacific Coaster, and the context of that competition was that everybody got the same layout, and then everybody did the best they could with that layout, or whatever ideas they had, and that was the nature of the competition. Then whoever got the highest score, they would win the competition. So this didn't quite meet the deadline, but you thought, hey, this is worth just holding on to for a little minute and polishing up, expanding a little bit.
Right.
So that's what gives the context for that. So this is a layout that was made by Pacific Coaster. So you had like it's an interesting place to begin, isn't it? You had a very specific brief. You are using someone else's ride that you couldn't modify without breaking the rules of the contest. And luckily it was a fantastic layout, as layouts go. They were very, very happy to get this one. So this very specific brief gave rise to a very specific plan to get the most out of it. And I find that really interesting. So the order went, you put the coaster down, you imagine where it's going to go, You then make was it a station weenie for you? Was you trying to lead people towards the coaster? Is that what you're saying?
Right.
But would that principle be, say if this was an area that didn't have a coaster, what sort of landmark could you imagine doing a similar thing with?
If it didn't have a roller coaster, I would like to think it would have some other headline attraction. If you remove the coaster entirely from the equation in this particular map, I certainly would probably have done things differently, obviously. But I wouldn't think that there'd be the need for that kind of weenie element, that sightline, if there otherwise wasn't a coaster. But if you had things that were otherwise just like a dark ride, a flat ride, like a carousel, I still think that the disciplines and the philosophy is still kind of the same, because even with the carousel, I knew that it's a carousel, it's a rounded structure, it probably should be pretty central, and it just happened to be kind of maybe fortuitous that it kind of fit nicely there in that position, kind of in front of the Cobra roll, leading on that half diagonal towards it from the map edge. Because obviously it's rounded, so not every sight line is going to lead towards it, but at least that primary pathway is. And then from there, every other kind of path around it kind of gives you at least a glimpse at it. But otherwise, it's probably going to be a little bit tricky unless it's kind of like Cinderella's Castle or Spaceship Earth at Epcot, where it's humongous and more centralized, where no matter where you are in the park, you're kind of going to be seeing it. You definitely wouldn't have that here with the temple station. But I do think that if you are in the area, at least you would see the temple, you would see the dark ride, but you definitely wouldn't be able to see it from like the middle of the park if this was truly at like the edge of an overall bigger park, you know?
Absolutely. So it's sort of like gains its own personality only in the context that there's nothing else that's going to try and wrestle it from it. And if you've not got to worry about that because you're getting this design, you can get a bit more flexible with that idea, perhaps. And also, when you're a peep,
right,
it's this is like a beef that I have with this game. It's not necessarily a beef, it's just like a reality that we've got to settle with the game. It isn't really any sort of good analog to reality whatsoever. The most simple way that I can explain this is the way that roofs play such an important role in our sort of interpretation of this game, where perhaps a newer player is going to come in and say, well, in real life, there's nothing going on roofs, right? There might be an air conditioning unit, or there might be, ideally, the ideal world, there's no crunch on your roof, right? Because that means It's all going well, it was all very well made, it's all very plain. So a departure from real life that we must acknowledge about Roller Coaster Tycoon is that it's isometric, we're looking down on the whole situation. And I don't see that as like a bad thing at all. I think it's just a thing. It's a departure from reality that we've got to acknowledge, which is why I find that this notion of sightlines quite interesting, because it's quite a interesting notion to... When I first came into this community, something that we don't really see it very often nowadays, but people were always saying it's so immersive back in the day. Do you remember this? Mm-hmm. I guess people still kind of say it now, but it was said a lot when I was starting out. Oh my God, this is so immersive. And I was like, what does it mean to be immersive? You can imagine yourself there. Which is quite a difficult thing with this game, which is why it was such like a point of remark when people were saying it. They were saying, I can take myself out of the sitting in my desk chair looking at a screen, and I can picture myself walking down this path, which no doubt everyone can do with this park, because it evokes so much of those facsimiles of reality that you are completely just enamored with the whole spirit of the whole thing, which is why it got such a high score in my opinion. It's just so realistic, but I don't necessarily like the word realistic, because this would still be very magical even if it wasn't true to life in that regard. It's the idiosyncrasies of reality that are more important than like the realistic things, and those things can be evoked in a fantasy setting. For example, we can imagine this being like a volcano blasting out in the middle of here and everyone's dodging the lava, and it's still being just as good, if not realistic. I guess that leads to a next question that I have, which is, I guess I'll open it up quite wide and ask you, this is a tricky question, so don't, worry if you don't necessarily have an answer. What is macro to you? If you would try to just put like a description to it right now, if you would try to define it, what would macro be to you in the context of Roller Coaster Tycoon?
It is a tricky question. I mean, it's nebulous. What it means to, as you put it, what it means to me could mean something else entirely to you or another player. But I do think that the overall definition of it is probably pretty ubiquitous no matter who's playing, because you'll have the idea of, well, okay, macro, how is it laid out? Is it laid out in a reasonable way? Is it laid out in a way that is going to service the kind of core concept of the map? Is it realistic? Does it look like this is grounded in reality? Is it going to maybe present itself in a way that, okay, a theme park designer in reality actually did this? Is this something that could actually be in Disney's Animal Kingdom? Could it be in Busch Gardens, Six Flags, other parks like Starpoint, even Hydroportal's advertised on New Element, his Six Flags park? They all are labeled as a certain type of park, and they are designed that way in a manner that's believable to that park. If I called this a Six Flags park, it probably wouldn't be as successful. So that does play a role in it. You need to make sure that you find out what kind of park you are trying to make and then design it that way. But otherwise, I think you mentioned it quite a while ago. You mentioned the word wrestle with peeps, and I think that is also kind of a big part of it too, is the balance. I've heard other players say, well, I want to make sure that the viewer, like me or you, the other players looking at this park, I want to make sure the viewer is able to see things. But that's not really how it is in real life. Real life has trees, real life has structures that are otherwise going to prohibit the viewer in the isometric world from actually seeing things. And I think that balance is important, but I do find myself lending a bit more to the peep more than the viewer. Like, I don't necessarily care too much that the viewer can't see something if it's going to kind of service that core concept of, well, is this looking realistic? Is that something that an actual theme park design might implement? I'll kind of take that sacrifice and run with it, because to me, that's a bit more valuable in servicing the overall macro. Because, I mean, the viewer isn't designing the park. The corporation, the company, or the whatever concept is going to be producing this park is really what I kind of care about. So if that means alienating some things, I'll take that risk. I think eventually it'll pay off if you do it appropriately.
I think it certainly did here.
Even looking from this angle too, if you try to position yourself like as a peep, if you were to be standing directly out front of the dark ride entrance, the facade there, there's a bend in the wooden path, simply because there's a turn on the coaster, but directly in a diagonal or even a half diagonal, if you are standing at the plaza of the dark ride, looking directly at the temple, that plaza of the coaster, they're pretty equal in terms of an angle. I try to make sure that even if there's that carousel there is that bend in the pathway, that if you're standing in one spot, you very likely are hopefully going to see that weenie, that dark ride facade, the temple, even if it is quite a ways away, and even if it isn't in fact a straight line as the crow flies. So you still have the ability to kind of parse out where you are within the map if you're just standing there.
So the other day we were on Discord and I posted my videos, episode 4 of Fundamental Forest, and I put like lines on the thumbnail because I wanted to talk a bit about Sightlines. And
right.
a user, who was it that said it? Was it Timmy? Timmy said, not the Steve lines, I can't believe that it instantly you put some lines on a map and now you own the concept of drawing sightlines on a map. And of course you've got your structural sort of guiding lines in here as well. How important is planning in getting this thing done? Can you vibe your way through it, or is the Steve line anchoring you to your goal the whole time?
I think it depends on the project a little bit. For this, absolutely. We were talking about it even before this. You and I, Sammy, about how some of the older Robbie 92 maps, the older Pacific Coaster maps, probably influenced me a bit more in this style of park making, where I want to make sure that I am kind of abiding by certain principles and disciplines in theme park design to make it appear more realistic. But when you have other projects, like my Bateras park, the Spotlight Park there, where it's more old school and it really can kind of coast on vibes, I might not be so inclined to really rely heavily on what a peep can see and what it's going to lead them to, because that's not kind of the atmosphere I'll be going for. But it certainly does have a play in it, even if it's a bit minimal. For this, the vibes are going to be hopefully eliciting from the overall macro, because I planned so diligently. But I certainly do try to have lines. I'll take screenshots. I worked with Andrew pretty closely on this too from New Element, and I'll send him screenshots with paint lines on it, just showing them what they should be looking at. And I even did that in head-to-head, the contest. I think 94 Supreme Posse would make fun of me for it. Also, a wonderful dude from New Element. So it's definitely probably a pretty big part of my overall process, drawing lines on things.
Well, rightly so if you're going to be communicating things. It makes a lot of sense to me that Andrew was someone that you'd go to for stuff like this, because that sort of like the seminal park of recent times was Belle Isle, which felt like every layer of it was so meticulous that it felt like it must have been, drawn out on that old-fashioned blue paper on like a slanted desk many decades ago by somebody who had like a just a ruler and like circles, and that was all that they were working with, and it was reflected in like the end point. So in a sense, sort of like the medium dictates the message. So in that way, you've got to sort of break beyond Roller Coaster Tycoon and go into paint and say, well, my medium isn't just in Roller Coaster Tycoon, it is in paint as well if I'm going to communicate this specific idea. So here we are, we've booted up Veritas. This is the complete sort of polar opposite in terms of the very highest end of the game. Whereas Mccor was very like leaning into every little bit of simulacrum of the real world, the half diagonals, the tables at skew-F angles. This one takes a completely different approach, where it's way more of like a classic way of looking at things. But these principles are still very much alive, just in a different fashion. So you say you're not, in this context, you're not looking as much from a peep's perspective. You're looking at it more from a viewer's perspective. Is that a fair thing to say?
I think so. The style here, as you mentioned, is definitely a bit more classic. New Element as a website, years ago, 2003, 2005, was very much kind of grounded in this, 2x2, 2x3 isms that are pretty prevalent here. They're dressed up a little bit more now, since this was in 2017 when this was released, but definitely more of a vibe based park, because if you're looking at some of the pathways, even right here, right now, even that long straightaway along the grass, I mean, what is that path actually leading to? A 2x3 green structure. There's nothing really to kind of draw the guest there. So there's nothing really probably in the front of my mind when I was building this to think, okay, there used to be something prevalent there, even if it is a station for a chairlift. But overall, I was kind of just trying to capture that atmosphere that was otherwise pretty evident with parks like Rivers of Babylon, parks built by Slob, Titan, anybody who was active back in those early years. I tried to kind of capture that magic in 2017, which I think was successful, but otherwise the macro wasn't a huge part of my build process.
Something that really helped me when I started mining into what are people talking about when they're talking about macro, and just sort of piecing together from observing other people talking about it on New Element, in the Discord, all of these sorts of things. Something that really helped crystallize really what a lot of people were gesturing towards, but maybe not consciously doing so, is that a lot of these macro principles in Roller Coaster Tycoon are just, on some level, graphic design principles, which are, broadly applied. We say, graphic design. They're just going to be very, very basic design principles, no matter what you're designing, be it architecture, a poster, no matter what it is. There's some stuff that's just kind of true, right? Is that a explanation that's resonating with you on sort of like, is that something that you're thinking about, or do you disagree with that? What are your thoughts on that statement?
I would agree. I mean, to your point earlier, I mean, this is really kind of just considered a medium. This is to us probably art, maybe not to the general public, it's just a video game, but to us, we put thought into it, right? So like graphic design, doing a painting, drawing, you try to make it in a way that's going to be pleasing, right? Aesthetically pleasing to you and hopefully to somebody else. That's really what you try to achieve. So yeah, I think any principle that you apply in graphic design hopefully kind of carries into your build process. I certainly like to think that I get my years, my wasted years of art school and color theory. I try to apply them, and I try to apply certain principles like graphic design and where things should go. So yeah, I do think they have certainly some shared components that hopefully people like to implement and take advantage of.
We can really see the color theory in the gray and the brown here. Anyway.
They're neutrals, aren't they?
That's our story. We're sticking to it. When you're sitting down to play, if you had to form a hierarchy of what's most important to you when you're playing, what would you say is like your top three? And would macro be in that top three?
Yes. Macro would be in the top three, absolutely. I think it was probably when I was first starting out. This was back in 2003, 2004. I was a total dweeb, had no idea what I was doing. I was just trying to make things that looked cool, copying people that I admired at the time. But I think it was Posix, also from New Element, who mentioned that, I mean, it's not going to be worth a damn if you're not doing yourself a favor in planning things out first. I mean, when you go to create a painting in real life, you're not just going to put the brush to the canvas, right? You're going to probably pencil it out first, sketch it out. And I think that definitely changed things for me, understanding that even if it's just bare bones planning, not even to the degree of putting grids down and sightlines, if you're going to hopefully sketch something out first a little bit, you're going to find success in finally fleshing it out a bit more. I think even some of the more I'm not saying they're lesser players, but even some of the newer players perhaps even find that to be a pretty fortuitous endeavor to lay things out a little bit, make sure the macro is set in stone first a bit before you flesh it out. So that's definitely probably the first thing I would consider when starting something new, perhaps. Other than that, macro being number one, coasters would be number two for a top three, because this is Roller Coaster Tycoon. In the beginning, also, when I started playing roller coasters, I didn't care. I was not a big roller coaster person. I was more of like an architecture person. I liked the idea of being able to create like buildings and like design things like that. So my coasters were arguably trash. They were kind of cast to the side. But now I definitely think coasters play a pretty big role, right? That's what the whole game is about. And if you can kind of cater things, design things to suit that, it's going to hopefully with your planning, end up in a way that's going to be pleasing, aesthetically pleasing, based on your macro and all of your color choices, the way that you've laid things out. But then with your coasters, then I think, I mean, my third thing that I probably consider the most after the coasters would be probably just the theme, the style in which I'm trying to go for. That's also probably a pretty an unspokenly large piece of what we do as builders, right? And you could probably even agree to this, Sam, where once you've done all the boring stuff, well, then you kind of got to get into the good stuff, right? Of how I'm going to design something, what colors is it going to have, what textures am I going to use, and you'll be off map, copying, pasting things, right? Seeing what works and what doesn't. That takes up more time probably than planning, because you're not going to want to flesh something out until you decide what you actually want to build. So I think probably at least just deciding on a theme, testing some things out is going to be that third big piece that I go after.
You know, I think when you and Extreme 97 were building Lemuria in Head 9, that was the first big example that I had ever seen personally of people building stuff off map and then copying it in. I was like, whoa, is this what people have been doing? So I think I was a latecomer to that concept, but admittedly at that point I was a bit more flippant about the whole thing. I was a bit of, a bit of a maverick back then. Do you remember when I was a maverick?
Yeah, you were a loose cannon.
I was a loose cannon. That was a great season, wasn't it? It might have gone a bit pear-shaped, but what a great bunch of parks we built.
Hell yeah.
And we're here, speaking of Extreme 97, we're here having a little look at Glowworm, which is another sightliney. Would you say that your ideas that you sort of like that crystallized really vividly in Mccor, were they very much with you when you were building Glowworm as well?
Yes. You mentioned Lemuria. I think that's probably where it kind of first started for me, even kind of just putting, not to put Extreme to the side, but even just for myself, and him going along for the ride, still being very much a big piece of the park still. I think for me, I wanted to, again, kind of achieve that idea of, well, what kind of park is this? And it was meant to be kind of a Universal Studios type park, Islands of Adventure, where, okay, if that's the kind of park it's going to be, a theme park grounded in that level of realism, where does the guests need to be drawn to? What weenies are there, so to speak? And where do they need to arrive at the end of a path? What attractions are there going to be? So that definitely kind of started there, even if my collaborations with Extreme started much earlier than that. But definitely kind of carried into this. I wanted to emphasize them even more myself, and I think Extreme did also. But at the same time, this, to give some background on this one, this also, the macro of it was kind of already predetermined a little bit. Alex does have a share on this park where the coaster was made by Extreme, but then Alex did some of the macro already, and then the next builder, I think it was a Dr. Dirt challenge, right, from Discord years ago, where we had to kind of work with predetermined macro too a little bit. We've expanded on it, but we did have to kind of deal with it a little bit and take it as our own. But yeah, I think that definitely does carry a little bit here into this park too, that macro idea.
I think that's a great point that I'll highlight to anyone who might be watching this, who's perhaps like a newcomer to the community. One of the surest ways to skill up is to get involved in any of the community competitions that are going on. Be they, big tentpole, new element ones like Head to Head, or the more casual ones like Dr. Dirt's, or like the monthly ones, which are kind of like a middle ground between those two, the monthly ones on DirtLink. If you hop in there, you have to work to a deadline. There'll be like some parameters that you have to keep to. Your creativity is either going to pop off, or you're going to find that it's not for you, and both of those things are good information, I suppose. But I very much recommend giving them a go for newcomers, because those are the things that are going to help you skill up extremely quickly and learn principles fast that are going to help you out later on. And those Dr. Dirt ones, so much cool stuff came out of them, even if not every single one was ever finished. We've got a few really cool things out of that, which made them very much worthwhile. I've got a question for you. This was a question that I had when you were speaking about your top 3 things that are important to you. And my question is, do you think that a macro could be at the bottom of your priorities and the finished result be effective?
Maybe. That's a tough question because I wouldn't know, I guess, until the end result. But it'd be tough, I guess, because at that point you would just be kind of building on your intuitions, I guess, just as a builder. If you don't have the luxury of being able to plan something, I mean, it doesn't always often end well. I mean, I don't know anybody who's ever not planned a week-long vacation and had a good time. You need to make sure you plan some things out, but depends. I guess your caliber as a builder, maybe how much experience you have. Could I have done it with Extreme without planning something out to achieve this level of park making? Maybe, but it all depends, I guess. If you can fly by the seat of your pants and manage to whip out something good, then I guess that's what counts.
My follow-up question to that was perhaps going to be, could you name any examples of people where their macro is maybe not at the bottom of their priorities, but maybe, we're talking, maybe it didn't quite hit the top 10. Can you think of any builders that had effective parks? Even if they're not like spotlights, even if they're just designs, or even, small things like even on Micro Madness, you need to do macro though, don't you?
Yeah.
Can you think of any like counterpoints to the? Okay, I'll put to you a statement, and you see if you can like lawyer your way out of it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So I'm trying to think of like a counter example and say, actually, to my statement. So my statement is, macro is one of the least understood and most critical aspects of park making. And it cannot be understated how crucial macro is. So that's my statement. You go ahead.
You need macro. You need it. It's.
You can just agree with me if you want. That's fine. But I thought it'd be like a fun thing to see if you could like give me a counter example of that.
I think probably the biggest counter example I could give, the first thing I thought of was a park that is not good at macro, probably, like, at least in my eyes and the way that, I act as though my way of doing macro is the law when it's definitely not. But at least for me, Rivers of Babylon, I think it's an incredible map. I think it has an incredible atmosphere, a level of immersion that honestly, I feel like I haven't even achieved. And that could just be my nostalgia. But I don't necessarily think it's probably designed in a manner that maybe like a true theme park would design it. But it's successful in other things. It's successful in atmosphere. It's successful in rides. It's successful in architecture for that given time, back in 2003 or 4. And even the colors, even if it is just kind of a sea of beige. I know everybody makes fun of me for using beige a lot, but it's not to be understated, just because you're using a neutral primarily in your color scheme with accents of other colors, that's not a negative. If anything, that's a masterful use of color. So I do think that's probably the biggest example, but it still finds success. It finds success in other ways that even if the macro may have been cast to the side and more so on vibes being used, like my Spotlight Park was, I still think there's merit in that. You don't need Sightlines to find a successful roller coaster tycoon map.
I think one of the most challenging things about macro is it's so hard to like quantify, which is why I think that we keep sort of resorting to Sightlines as like a metric that we can fall back on. Like we can go, oh, can a peep see that? That's sort of measurable in a way, isn't it? Whereas if we don't have that, what are we talking? How do we describe it? You know what I mean?
It's right. You said it many times already that it's kind of that nebulous idea. But if you do try to put it in that realism term of, well, what would a true park do, like Disney or Universal? They want to make sure that as a guest you're only seeing a certain thing, or that you're not seeing a certain thing. They'll hide it in some manner, or exploit it in some manner. So to have something that's tangible, like a sightline, and what a guest should be led towards. I think that is probably the only true way to grasp it, maybe in a way that's, again, has that kind of that tactile sense to it. Because otherwise, how you put something somewhere and lay it out, that's just preference, right? The same way that how somebody designs something as a graphic artist, that's all preference. Are there certain rules to follow? Maybe, sure, but then again, that's a rule that only they probably abide by as an artist. There are no rules in art. So it all depends on the builder, I guess, in terms of how they want to actually provide that sense of tactile sightline to a park.
There we go. This is something that you and I built together. We say it was like 99% me and then like a little bit you, right?
I think I placed a couple bushes.
I was astounded when I was like helping in what little way I could to build this. I just thought that it was just so... It just felt very well... Not even like well, just so like perfectly formed. It just sort of like appeared. Most days you'd tune in and there'd just be another amazing bit either begun or crystallizing there right before our eyes. And then I built like this pit here. Should we do the cutaway view? Come on, where is it? Oh, this is cute. And this is before I really started getting like... I started getting real philosophical about the whole thing, because I was like, why are these guys so much better than I am? Why can't I do that? It's because I wasn't thinking the same way. It's why I've got to come on and pick your brains about these things. And I feel like I was a real latecomer to, I don't know, I feel like everyone who's like really good at something, whether they know it or not, they have this mental framework that they've built for themselves. And that goes for, you know, something like this where we can talk about macro till the cows come home, or something like, you know, soccer, where on some level it's like kicking a ball, but on a more important level it's about morale, it's about where are your guys, it's about, oh, do they respect you as like a manager or a captain, and like all of this three-dimensional stuff. So you can't be looking at Roller Coaster Tycoon and saying, if I build enough roller coasters, if I place enough objects, I will be good. No more than you can say, if I kick enough footballs and run across enough pitches, I'm going to be good at soccer. Because that fundamentally misses the idea that there is something both internal and external to that experience of actually doing it, if that makes sense. Did that make any sense to you?
Well, yeah, right. I think it sounds like you're kind of leading towards the idea of like, well, if you do something for 10 years that you a master at it. Isn't that the rule? It's like you do something for 10 years, you're a master at that thing.
Yeah, I've heard that. Another one I've heard is like 10,000 hours or something. If you do 10,000 hours of it, you'd be a master. But I don't think you hit 10,000 hours just doing that thing. I think on some level you are forming a mental framework, the actual thing that's going to help you, which is kind of what I was trying to get at with Fundamental Forest, where I'm like, the things that I got good at in most of my Roller Coaster Tycoon career was, oh, are we doing like a hack, or like how do you specifically get this technical thing to work? And that's not what's actually good about these things. The more important thing is having motivation for what you're doing, having good macro. All of those things are more important, more fundamental than a lot of the other skills, because who cares what kind of building you can make, right? I feel like Lemuria would still be an extremely, extremely good park if we did it in like Pro Tours 2 bench, right? So it's not all the Greeblies that are making this good, right? It's the more broad concepts, and I think that's hard for someone to perhaps accept at the very beginning. Though I hope that other people are different from me and they can get it much more quickly than I have, because I was very, very slow on the uptake.
Well, I think it does take a little bit from what you're saying with style. Just because you're doing it on this particular bench or that particular bench, it does kind of rely on those fundamentals. Like you said, your fundamental forest project. It's kind of going to be a little bit worth nothing if your fundamentals aren't necessarily kind of solid. So if you don't have maybe that nice foundation of macro laying things out, if you don't have that nice foundation of, well, this roller coaster, is it going to have these certain elements that this type needs, like a B&M or an Intimate? Is it going to abide by those kind of coaster zone rules in real life to kind of look acceptable, to seem real? So I think it all kind of boils down to that kind of term of something tangible. Does it feel tangible? Does it feel like something that could exist if it's realism? Is it something that has that level of immersion if it's just something more classic? So I think it kind of just like everything else, it's a matter of preference. If you have those fundamentals down pretty nice, your preferences hopefully are going to come through in a way that are pleasing. Otherwise, I'm not sure. It's a tricky one.
It's all very tricky. We're on the cutting edge here, Steve. And you are riding it like a rail. We are cool skateboarders now. We just have to be careful of our knees. Because this is when the knee problems have already begun. Do you have knee problems, Steve?
We don't have to talk about that.
Because I was going to share that I do have knee problems, but they are through stretching and respecting the knees.
Of course, I have knee problems.
They are clearing up. So maybe that's something you could do as well. Are you doing your stretches?
I try. My daughter certainly makes me do my stretches just by having to play and interact with her. So yeah.
You know, I can't sit down cross-legged because I've got a hip impingement.
Oh, I can do that.
So you've got that on me. But I used to have a lot of pain in like my hips and my knees, and I feel like the pain in my knees was coming from my hips. Yeah, it's like a knock-on like down. And this is true for the whole body. It's very like holistic device, the body. You mess up one thing and it messes up a bunch of others down the line. But I've been doing my stretch.
10,000 hours punched open playing Roller Coaster Tycoon at your desk.
Yeah, this is probably what's happened there. But apparently it's like physiological, like it's a little like bone spur. But the Roller Coaster Tycoon, it didn't help, I can tell you that. But do you feel like there's anything we've neglected in our conversation? Is there anything that you'd like to bring up and like you'd want to discuss? Because I think we've done a pretty good job of this.
I think so. The only thing I would probably, in my imparting of all of my infinite wisdom, kind of just circle back, maybe keep things a bit on the whole. When we talked about my kind of post-mortem, that comment that I made after the release of Macaw, we talked about fundamentals, we talked about the macro, everything like that. I think probably one of those more underrated tools that I mentioned in the comment is patience. I think that is a necessity for any medium, any art, graphic design, you name it, where if you don't have the patience to sit down, plan things, if you don't have the patience to go off of the map and try some things out for a theme, designing something, doing several iterations of a coaster, it's kind of going to be a little bit wasted, I feel like, in a way, because if you don't exercise that patience, you're not going to find yourself in a manner of success. Maybe take a look at Starpoint, take a look at Belle Isle. For anybody who is familiar with how those parks were built, they were basically rebuilt. Andrew and Pacific Coaster built those parks basically twice because they knew that, well, things are changing. I can do things a little bit better, maybe change this coaster, change this building. So if you don't have that level of patience to find that that in yourself, to change things and make those iterations, I think that you're doing yourself a disservice. So I would say that if you're planning things out, take your time. If you're doing a coaster, take your time, because that's really what's going to make it all worthwhile.
I couldn't agree more. That's a fantastic point, actually. Without the tempered spirit, the patient soul, you're not going to get very far. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you sharing your input on the whole thing. I knew as soon as I started reading that document that you gave us at the end of Mccor, that it's something that you'd thought a lot about. So I wanted to delve a bit deeper into what you were saying, and I'm really glad to say that I've learned a lot from this conversation. I really appreciate you joining me today, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Is there anything that you want to say to the people?
Everything I'm saying here is just me and my disciplines. It is not a rule that you have to follow.
Amen to that, brother.